Welcome to the Ambassador Baseball Show. My name is Cole Cleveland, and today we will continue our series that we have titled Rethinking Athletics. Over the last several episodes, we've spent a lot of time identifying the problems. We've talked about the culture of youth sports, we've talked about worship, we've talked about family priorities in the local church. We have looked at the purpose of athletics from a biblical standpoint. We've talked about parents and coaches, and we've looked at authority and order and structure. And at this point, if we are not careful, we could leave this series feeling very discouraged. Because once you begin to see the problems, it becomes difficult to unsee them. And that's true not just about athletics, which it is true about athletics, but it's true about life. You begin to notice things that previously seemed normal, and now you recognize how damaging it is. You recognize the pressures that have become culturally accepted. And you begin seeing how many families are exhausted. You begin to realize that your family is exhausted. Maybe that series that we've gone through, maybe this series has allowed you to recognize how overwhelmed your family is because of the way you have approached sports. Maybe you're frustrated. Eventually, you might find yourself asking this question. Okay, I see the problem, but what do I do now? That is the question that I want to begin to answer today, because I believe that there is another way. I believe that the hamster wheel that we call youth athletics is so dangerous for Christian families. And I think that there is another way. It's not perfect. It's definitely not easy, but it is better. And it is definitely more biblical. And it is definitely healthier for your family. It is a way that allows athletics to function as the gift that God intended it to be. Let's start with a simple observation. Every system is producing something. That's a reality. Every school system is producing an individual. Every church producing an individual. Every family producing an individual. Every business, every sports organization, they're all producing something. The question is not whether a system is producing. The question is, what is it producing? Over the last several years of being in this position that I'm in, I have become increasingly convinced that modern youth sports is producing outcomes that many families never intended. Youth athletics is producing exhaustion. Youth athletics is producing anxiety. Youth athletics is producing comparison and family fragmentation. It's producing instability in the lives of young people. And in many cases, it's producing misplaced priorities. But listen, what if athletics could produce something different? Okay, what if athletics became a tool for strengthening families instead of pulling them apart? What if athletics reinforced discipleship instead of competing against it? What if athletics supported the local church instead of replacing it? What if athletics became a training ground for maturity rather than a platform for self-promotion? I believe all those things are possible. And I believe many Christian families are hungry for exactly that. And you might be one of them. You might be sitting listening to this series and agree totally that athletics as a gift from God can provide me many blessings from the Lord. One of the most common conversations that I have with parents, it goes something like this. Coach, we love sports. We love athletics. All we've ever dreamed of is for our kids to be a part of it. But we just don't like what sports is becoming, and we don't like what sports is making our kids to be. And honestly, I understand that conversation very well. I understand exactly what they mean, because most families are not rejecting athletics. They're rejecting the culture that has grown around athletics. They're rejecting pressure. They're rejecting chaos. They're rejecting the constant pursuit of more and more and more and more. And they are searching for something healthier. I think most Christian families are. And the good news is that God has already given us that framework. We just need to lean into it. We don't need to invent a solution here. We need to recover biblical priorities. And that takes strength, that takes wisdom, that takes steadfastness. And you got to know your Bible first. The answer is not found in better scheduling. That's not the answer. And a lot of people think, okay, well, maybe I'll just lighten my load. That's not it. The answer is not found in better tournaments. Nope. You're not going to find the solution there. The answer is not found in a more talented coach. You're going to find a lot of families do that, okay? They go from team to team to team because they're trying to find the better coach, the better coach, the better coach that promises more and more and more and more. The answer is found. Here's the key. Here's the secret. This will unlock everything for you. The answer is found. This is a biblical principle in rightly ordered priorities. When God comes first in your life and in your family, things become clear. When worship is truly central, your life becomes healthier. When family is protected, and I'm talking about the biblical model of family, when that is protected, your life, the bond of peace inside of your family, that becomes stronger. When discipleship becomes primary, the decisions that you have to make on a daily basis become super easy. When athletics functions underneath all of those priorities, athletics, sports, baseball becomes a blessing, not a hindrance. It becomes a blessing from the Lord. But when athletics sits above all those priorities, or even just one of those priorities, and you get it out of order, athletics, sports, that single sport, it becomes destructive for your family. And this is one of the reasons that I believe Christian families need to stop asking, how much athletics can we fit into our lives without it affecting worship? That's the wrong question. How much sports can we fit into our lives without affecting our church, without affecting, guys, that's wrong. That's backwards. We need to ask this question. How can athletics serve the things that God has already called us to prioritize? I'm going to say that again. This is the question, and I would write this down in your journal. This is the question in approaching athletics. This will change everything for you. How can athletics serve the things that God has already called us to prioritize? That is a completely different question. The first question, it treats athletics as the priority that we center our life around and then try to fit everything around it. The second question, the correct question, it treats athletics as a servant. And that's exactly what it is. That distinction changes your entire approach to athletics. I mean, imagine a family where church attendance is not constantly under attack. You'd never have to make that decision again. Parents are intentionally discipling their children. You're not having to debate whether, okay, do we do athletics? Do we do discipleship? What if they served each other? What if coaches understood their role? Imagine a scenario where coaches understood their role. Imagine a scenario where athletes understood their purpose, their God-given purpose, and they understood the purpose of the sport. Competition exists, but it is properly ordered. Imagine that life where excellence is pursued without becoming an idol. Imagine a life where success is celebrated without becoming an identity. Imagine where failure becomes an opportunity for growth rather than a crisis where we have to call the family counselor, the family psychologist because we lost a game, because we struck out. Listen, that's not a fantasy. That's not fantasy world. That's possible, and that's actually possible under the divine biblical model of the family. But listen, dads and moms, especially dads, It requires intentionality, focus, steadfastness, because culture will never drift toward biblical order. Culture, that is the world, will always drift towards chaos. If you want order, that requires biblical leadership. If you want order in your life, if you want your family to be well ordered, it requires conviction. If you want order in your life, it requires families that are willing to think differently together. And that is what I believe is beginning to happen. More and more Christian families are realizing that they cannot simply follow the current culture wherever it leads. They're beginning to ask the harder questions. They're beginning to evaluate their priorities. They're beginning to examine the fruit that is being produced in their homes. And listen, although sometimes that is sad, it's kind of like how we began this whole podcast where, okay, we've looked at all the problems and man, that's sad. It's also encouraging because real change always begins with an honest evaluation. Now, let me say something that may surprise you. I do not believe the answer is for every Christian family to leave sports. Okay, I don't believe the answer is isolation. I don't believe the answer is withdrawal. I don't believe the answer is just set it on fire and walk away from it. I don't think that at all. The answer is to redeem the gift that God has given to us, to reform it. We need to rethink athletics through the lens of Scripture, through the lens that God gave us in His Word. We need to rebuild an athletic culture underneath the lordship of Christ. We need coaches who understand discipleship. We need parents that understand stewardship. We need athletes who understand worship. We need organizations that understand order. And when those things begin coming together, something beautiful happens. Athletics begins serving in its proper purpose, its God-given design. Athletics becomes a tool. Baseball becomes a training ground. It becomes a classroom. It becomes an opportunity. It is a gift. It's not a god. It's not an idol. It's a gift. And gifts from God are meant to be enjoyed. They're meant to be stewarded for God's glory. As we move into the final portion of this series, we are going to begin discussing what that life actually looks like. How do families build that culture? How do coaches lead in this way? How do organizations structure themselves differently? And how do we create environments that prioritize discipleship and family and worship and excellence all at the same time? Those are the questions that we're going to be answering in these future episodes. Because let me give you some encouragement. There is another way. We don't have to get in this rat race. We don't have to be in this hamster wheel. And I believe that there are many, many Christian families and churches, biblical churches, that want exactly this. They want athletics to be a part of their life, but they want it to be ordered correctly. They don't want to have to bow to the way that culture views athletics. And so let's begin putting those priorities together. Hey, thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Ambassadors Baseball Show as we rethink athletics. If you'd like to learn more about what we are doing and what we are building, stay informed with these podcasts and don't be afraid to share them with coaches and parents and pastors and other organizations, because we are praying that the Lord will use this ministry to impact the world of athletics with the gospel. I believe Christian families want exactly this. but let's get on the same page before we start moving forward together. We'll see you guys next time.